Hey guys, it's Cheryl Nembhard here,
And I'm Dwayne Beckford,
and you are listening to the Safe Space Podcast.
a limited series podcast on Black men and mental health.
Guys, today's episode is going to be one that will truly inspire, educate, and enlighten you. We are talking about the stigma that lies within the Black community around mental health. Goodness, Dwayne, this is a big one.
It's a big one. It's a big one.
I can't tell you growing up how many times the whole concept of mental health was demonized and shunned, and it was hushed and pushed under the table, and we never talked about struggles. We never talked about anything. There was always this pressure to have it all together,
Right.
or pray it away.
That's right. That's right.
What do you? I went there.
I would agree with that 1,000%. Especially as a Black man, there was never a space to be vulnerable
Yes.
or be able to really share what you're feeling. It was kind of like, you just got to be strong. You got to be tough. And as you said, pray it through. Go take a book, or go drink some water and forget about whatever
Cool
may
off.
be going on and cool off.
Yeah.
So this conversation around the Black community and mental health is really one that needs to be had. It's one that isn't talked about enough, because I think it is holding us back as a community, not talking about these things that we are dealing with, because we are human just like every other community, and we
Yeah.
deal with the same struggles, the same mental health issues that
Yeah.
other communities have the space and the liberty to talk about. So I'm really excited about this conversation today.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so happy we're doing what we're doing, and we're breaking down every single wall that we can in our own small way, and we've brought incredible powerhouse people to do just that. I can't wait for you to meet our panel of experts. They're going to be with us, and they have so much to share on the topic. Who do you have in the building?
So
Dwayne?
first up, we have Jermaine,
Yes.
Dr. Jermaine Morrison.
Back again.
We love having you out here, brother. But just to give a little bit for those who may be introducing to him for the first time, Jermaine is a registered social worker and has been involved in many community projects and initiatives over the last 20 years. He's worked alongside many reputable institutions, including York University, Seneca College, the City of Toronto, Toronto District School Board, and Francis Psychotherapy, where he's currently serving as an associate therapist. Jermaine continues to advocate for better access to mental health services for the Black community and facilitate mental health seminars and speaking engagements in the GTA. So welcome, Mr. Jermaine Morrison.
Welcome,
to the
Jermaine.
conversation.
So
Thank
happy
you.
to have you back again. And we have again in the building our expert, Roxanne Francis. I'm telling you, get ready for wisdom, clarity, and I'm telling you, absolute power. Love this woman. Roxanne is an award-winning registered social worker and psychotherapist. She is the CEO of Francis Psychotherapy and Consulting Services, where she runs a busy group therapy practice. She's also a keynote speaker, leadership coach, and a corporate consultant who addresses issues related to women's issues, race and equity, mental health, parenting, as well as wellness at work. Roxanne supports and mentors other therapists in the field, and is also, I could just attest to this one, media's go-to mental health expert. Just turn on the news, and if there's a question around mental health, I'm telling you, it's the season of Roxanne right now. She's providing answers to many of life's difficult questions. Please welcome Roxanne Francis.
Thank you so much for having me. It is my greatest pleasure to be here to be talking about these things.
Oh, so happy to have you.
Awesome. Is that all she does?
Listen, we have Avengers in the building, and I think this next one I'm gonna nickname Iron Man. Get ready.
So lastly, I call her sister, friend, but she is newly minted Dr. Crystal Garvey.
Come on, pause right there. Let's go.
Right?
Let's go.
Let's give it up for doctors in the building. She is a PhD graduate from Queen's University. Crystal has over 2 decades of nursing experience in the area of emergency and mental health nursing. Presently, she's a full-time faculty member at Durham College, teaching in the collaborative BSCN program with Ontario Tech University. Currently, she's an executive member of the Black Student Success Network at Durham College and equity and diversity steward for her local 354, the co-chair of the Provincial Women's Committee and co-chair for the Social Mapping Committee, OPSEU. So let's welcome Dr.
Well, all right.
Crystal Garvey.
Jesus.
So good to have you with us,
Thank
Iron Man.
you. It's an
Good.
honor.
Iron Woman. Uh, well, listen, we I don't even know where to begin. I'm just so blown away by having you guys with us for this conversation. But once again, guys, settle in, grab your notebooks, honestly, grab and share this as many times as you can. This conversation, I absolutely know, will be one that will be talked about for a very, very long time. Let's kick it off with this question, guys. How has the stigma surrounding mental health affected the Black community? And what steps can be taken to really begin to or continue the work of chipping down and reducing the stigma? Let's start with you, Roxanne.
Yeah, I think we have to take a look at our collective history. The Black community, the Black population, the African diaspora has a significant history of, unfortunately, of enslavement. And we didn't have our ancestors didn't have the luxury or the capacity or the allowance to recognize that we're not doing well, right? There was this constant need to go. And so if you had to slow down for whatever reason, there would be often fatal consequences. And over the years, even though currently in the Western world, enslavement is not as it was back then, but there's still the vestiges in our community of you can't slow down or something is wrong. There's something wrong if you slow down. And so you must keep going at all costs. And there is this idea that uh, you're weak, there's something wrong with you if you express that you are not well mentally. Even in our generations before us, one or two generations before us, people who immigrated to North America had to work 2 and 3 jobs, and it's still happening today, where individuals cannot afford to take time off from work. And so the idea of slowing down or stopping, or even slowing down to recognize that something isn't right with me, is seen as you're broken, you're weak. I'm from Jamaica, and where I'm from, if someone is unwell, there's this idea of being crazy and living on the streets because of a lack of uh, a social safety net, right? And so if your mental faculties weren't all there, then there's this idea of uh, living on the streets, being unable to take care of yourself, being unable to be a part of society. And so a lot of us carry that today, carry that in our families and pass it down. This idea of if you are unwell, then there is something disastrous that's going on. And we really need to try to step away from that. One of the things that I would say is, you know, allowing people to share what's going on for them, and we need to try to normalize this idea of uh, understanding when we are feeling anxious, when we're feeling depressed, sad, scared. These are all emotions that we all feel, and there's no sense in trying to hide it because it makes the situation worse. So I think that we need to try to make it a part of a regular discussion, make it a part of, I went to see my therapist last week, or I wasn't feeling so great yesterday, or I had a really down day and I'm feeling, I had to talk to someone, or I went to see my doctor. We need to start uh, you know, sowing seeds in a regular conversation to try to reduce some of that stigma.
Thank you for that. So good. Jermaine, to you.
You know what? This type of subject reminds me of a situation. I'm going to use this illustration. So I work with the school board, and I remember I was at school, and this is when recess was about to finish, and I see this young Black boy who probably was in grade 2, so he was probably like 7, 8 years old, and something was bothering him, like something obviously bothered him. And so I go up to him, trying to ask, is everything okay? And I see this boy trying to fight himself not to cry. That is a red flag, because a lot of the times when it comes to, mental health, one of the things that we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot is, to Roxanne's point, is not being able to have the space. and the safety net, if you will, to be able to learn to express our emotions when we were kids, right? Um, and it's hard. It's heartbreaking to see it because you see a lot of like young Black men, growing up, and they're almost like emotionless, right? It's like it's like if something happened, they're almost like numb to any type of emotion that's out there, and it's dangerous because when they're not able to express, whether if they're okay or not, it unfortunately manifests itself into very dangerous behavior. So this is why you see a lot of violence, especially what's happening in our schools now, right? You see a lot of kids not only just get into fights, but get into really violent behaviors, get into very dangerous stuff. And a lot of it is attributed to the fact that like they were conditioned, to kind of like be strong when it doesn't have to be. Like, yes, to be strong in some areas, but when you're not okay, there has to be that space where you can actually cry. You can actually just say, you know what, I'm not feeling well. I think for us as a Black community, again, to Roxanne's point, there has to be more people that will be able to sort of tell their stories, right? Being able to say, you know what, this is what I've had to deal with. And thank God there has been some progress, right? Lately I've been speaking to a lot of Black men, especially around my age, and it's kind of refreshing to hear that the same Black men that I've looked up to are also looking to see a therapist and all that type of stuff, which is great. But there's still more that has to be done in order for our community as a whole to heal.
Mhm. So good. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Christel.
Well, I just want to continue to build on the points of my brother Jermaine and my sister Roxanne, is that I think one piece that's missing outside of the part of listening is, where did the stigma come from, right? So let's talk a little bit about the history, and let's talk about the genesis of the anthropologist who believed that we were the missing link between monkeys and the human race. Let's talk about William McGee and Ernest Haeckel and Alex Hitler, who believed that that we were just specimens in a research lab, and the traumas that we endured there, and how then this information is now cultivated into textbooks. So now here we have Ivy League institutions perpetuating and teaching this information as if we are just specimens. That in itself is the foundation to why we have issues with dialoguing or having any form of discourse surrounding mental health in our community, because for centuries the voices did not exist. They were silenced because we were just considered specimens, right? And so that is the first piece that I really want to speak to. And our biomedical model, especially because, still being very closely affiliated with the front lines, this stuff is still published in textbooks. So I give you a perfect example that our Jarvis textbook, a health assessment nursing textbook, just recently, and when I say recently, just before the pandemic, I believe, hit, that they decided to take out of the textbook that Black people experience a higher threshold of pain. That was still in textbooks in the 21st century. So if we have institutions continuing to teach this information, then when we as individuals, Black members of our community, go to then seek help, as that is recommended, based on Jermaine and what Roxanne is saying, and then that discourse is not going to happen. No one's going to listen to us. Why? Because the textbooks that individuals are learning from identify and state otherwise. So until we're able to change the approach to our pedagogy, and until we're able to change the paradigm and have a paradigm shift with regards to dissemination of knowledge, or paradigm shift with regards to the approach of how we're caring for our Black community members in our mental health, when it comes to mental health, then change is not going to happen. And I'm not trying to be a pessimist by no means, but this is where the change needs to start. For our avid readers and our listeners out there, when we're talking about breaking the margins, with Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw's work and speaking about intersectionality, she alludes to some of this in her writings. When you think of, Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, when she talks about social cognitive theory, or the theory of intersectionality, because she took the word intersectionality and, evolved it into a form of theory. She does an amazing job of taking Dr. Crenshaw's work and identifying the systems of power that come into play that then now influence how we approach mental health, or approach learning, approach how we climb the ladder. If we're trying to get into that social corporate ladder, they speak to all of this. So until we acknowledge that within our own community and break down some of those silos within our community, then you know what, my friends, we're going to continue in this revolving door. So I'll leave it at that, because I can talk about this all day.
Everything you're giving me, I can't even sit still. But it's nuts. You're nuts. You're nuts.
I know.
Like I love you and you're nuts.
Listen here.
Right? Because you're here spitting all this fire, like, ooh.
Thank you for that, Dr. Crystal.
Wow.
So good.
Wow. That's all
So much so that you actually started the conversation around the second question, which is, what ways have historical traumas such as racism and discrimination impacted the mental health of Black individuals and communities? So I'm actually going to come back to you, Dr. Crystal, to start this one off, since you've already kind of led into this question. So go ahead, please.
Part of my research, I wanted to look at racism in education, in particular nursing, and the impact of our nursing students. Unfortunately, life turn of events did not allow me to do so. So the next thing I did look at was how bullying impacted the student nurse experience. And here's what's so fascinating about my research, is that I still ended up on the path of racism, because like it or not, bullying and racism is one of the same. Why? Because the outcomes, mental, emotional, physical, are usually detrimental to the individual on one receiving it. And I give, from the mindset of relativism, where you believe in your world that you're right in regards to what you're doing. How do you now navigate the racist when they believe that they're right? It goes back to paradigms. Where did this paradigm come from? And how do we now start to change that mindset and start to change that paradigm? So, in my last question, in our last, our first question, we talked about, the Ivy League institutions, and how they basically validated their mindset in books. So, I always tell young people, if you want to change a paradigm, especially when it comes to racism, just as white people and colonizers put this information between pages of a book, we need to write as well and put it between the pages of a book and then disseminate that knowledge. That's how we start to change mindsets, because mindsets come through reading. It's not just video and TikToks and all that stuff. And that stuff, it's good for the intended purpose that it's used for. But there's something to say about the power of words. And the power of the word brings forth life, or it can bring forth death. The power of words is what one shapes one's ideology and their belief systems and their world. So in that breadth, when you're talking about now racism and how it impacts our mental health, it impacts everything that we do. So if you're, again, looking at the various systems of power. So, I always draw back to Dr. Crenshaw's work and Dr. Patricia Hill Collins' work, because they did an amazing job outlining this. When you're talking about the systems of power with regards to relationality and how one's experience is relational to the racism that they may experience. So when you look at educational systems, who's teaching the curriculum? Who's creating the curriculum, right? And their curriculum is being developed based on whose belief system? The system of the person, the one that's creating that information. So if I believe, right, that if I'm a Darwinism and I'm a Darwinist, right, I believe in what Darwin says, and if I believe in the eugenics, and if I believe in all, what, all these researchers say, then guess what? My curriculum is going to be developed around this paradigm. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to create this discourse to these students. And then what am I doing? I'm planting that seed through my words and through what I'm writing to these kids for them to believe this paradigm. And then here's the cycle cycling through. So this is why it's critical that in our education systems and our political systems and every system, right, that we can identify, we need to have spaces where we exist. And not only that we exist, and I won't go there because there's Black people that are racist against themselves as well, but people that love themselves, that will, I love their community, that's genuine about bringing paradigm change.
Thank you. Wow.
Shots fired.
Jermaine?
You know what? First of all, I don't even think there's much I can say to that, but I will highlight a couple of things and to Crystal's point. So number one, when we talk about documentation, here's another example. It's just very recently, maybe just prior to the pandemic, that race-based data started being collected in Canada, right? And that is a huge problem because it's hard for us as a Black community. We've been verbally telling our stories, but nothing has really been documented. And a lot of it I personally attribute to the fact that, Canadian society, for the longest while, has touted itself, as a very inclusive, multicultural society. But with that, unfortunately, what happens is that it never gave space to tell our stories as to some of the atrocities that have happened to Black people since the inception of Confederation, right? It's just now we're starting to peel the layers of some of the stuff that, both the accomplishments of Black people, but also some of the oppressions that Black people have experienced in this country. Because if you look at it, when you look at our history books, especially when we talked about, Black History Month, remember in the beginning we've talked mostly about like US history, Black history.
Right.
There wasn't enough when it came to Canadian Black history, the good and the bad. It's only just recently we're learning about people like Viola Desmond and all these people, but that should have happened like over a century ago, if we had to be honest, decades ago. You know what I mean? So that's one thing. The second part, and again to Dr. Crystal's point, when we talk about racism, I want to lean towards like the systemic racism on top of it, right? Because again, I've always said, listen, people make up systems, right? And it's the people in power that will continue to reinforce how the system goes. And I'll give you a perfect example. Just recently, I'm looking at a report where Breonna Taylor, right, the officer that had shot Breonna Taylor, is now employed at another police department,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Now, if you're the family of that same daughter that got shot, that is traumatic. That is awfully traumatic because now you're in a situation where you just feel like, the same person that murdered your daughter is going around potentially murdering other people without any consequence. Yeah, he got fired from one field to wind up back in the same field in a different department. That does nothing for the Black community except re-traumatize the whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm gonna leave it at that though.
Thank you.
Dr. Roxanne.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to racism and discrimination, what people don't understand is how people internalize that, right? It is one thing to say, you know, um, we don't have a lot of Black people on our staff, or we don't have a lot of Black leaders in our organization, or we don't have a lot of Black students in our school, or, a company might exclude Black individuals sort of, in the background. They don't say it up front, but this is literally what's happening. What people don't understand is that individuals who are being excluded, who are being discriminated against, then internalize those that experience. They see it as rejection. They see it as, something is inherently wrong with me, why I'm not chosen, why I'm not being included. And that turns around to, low confidence, low self-esteem. It impacts how you show up in the world. It impacts how you show up in your relationships. It causes things like anxiety. It causes things like depression. It causes things like adjustment disorder. These are things that are really significantly impacting our community, and people are not following it to the source, which is the racism and discrimination. You know, I work with children who will say things like, I'm the only Black student in my school. So when I get in trouble, I don't know if it's because I did something wrong or if it's because I'm Black, right? So people carry those things inside of them. And and when that happens, then it's hard for people to admit that I'm not doing well, right? Because, you know, I'm being singled out now, right? So should I admit that I'm not doing well? You know, there's this idea around the social determinants of health or the social determinants of mental health, and people will say we'll talk about things like income or education or, you know, access to fresh fruits and vegetables and all those pieces. And people like to think that racism is one of the social determinants of mental health. And what I would like to say, I'd like to flip that on its head to say racism is actually the cause of these social determinants of mental health in the Black community. Because of racism, Black individuals in certain areas don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Because of racism, Black individuals don't have access to gainful employment. Because of racism, Black individuals don't have access to equal education. And all of those things impact our mental health.
Mm, thank you so much. You know, this is, I don't even know where to go with this, but I just was thinking about this one thing before we move to the next question. George Floyd's uh, horrible execution is really what that was. Traumatized non-Black world citizens. And I thought to myself, that is our everyday life.
Every day.
We have witnessed violence and genocide and racism and hatred and bias, and it's been that our entire life. So imagine ingesting that, imagine absorbing that, imagine living with that, viewing that all the time. You witnessed firsthand one singular incident, and you are physically not the same. You mark it as a moment in time. You keep reflecting how that moment did X, Y, and Z. Imagine.
Yeah.
You know, for us, it wasn't it for all of us, it was more of a finally. It was a finally.
Finally. Everyone's now hearing what we've all been saying for all of these years.
I want to build on one thing that Dr. Roxanne said, that because I think, and you just kind of alluded to it, is the historical trauma, the generational trauma, and how that plays the narrative of why our voices are not being heard when we're dealing with it. Because here's the truth: if you go into a workspace, or if you go into any space, especially if as a student or as an employee, and you allude to the fact that there's issues surrounding your mental health, right out the gate, that compromises your employment status, that compromises your status in the program. And right, because now, there's now you are now looked upon as more of a threat than you are, looked upon as a person that genuinely or sincerely needs help. So, 2020 was the year where that that narrative was flipped on its head, right? Just like Dr. Roxanne, I say the same thing in my lectures, that racism is not a social determinant of health, because it is because of these systems of power and the context of these systems of power, why we are where we are when it comes to navigating the social determinants of health. So I want to say thank you for that as well. And just like she also said, it's not only police officers, any form of system. So when you talked about, Breonna Taylor's murderer, I thought about Joyce Echaquan's murderer, who was a nurse.
Right.
And after she, and all she got was a slap on the wrist, and she got her, and then she got her license suspended, but she's back at work. She's back at work. And I need you to keep in mind, the Premier of Ontario, because obviously this was a national news headline, said there's no racism in Quebec. And he said that on his platform, quote for quote, "We don't have racism in Quebec." Wrong answer. So it's in every system. So again, we have to, come together as a collective and say, well, what are we going to do, right? To bring forth change, that when the murderers of Breonna Taylor, the murderers of Joyce Echaquan, because that's what it was. It was a legitimate murder. It wasn't just negligent. It was murder, right? How are we making sure that these people are not working in the front lines with vulnerable people and putting their life at risk?
Exactly.
100%.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. Well, guys, we're going to answer this one pretty quickly because I'm sure we've got some bullet points around it. How can we ensure that mental health resources and support are accessible and equitable for Black individuals, particularly those who may face financial or systemic barriers towards care? Please, please help us. Dr. Roxanne, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I think we have to start talking loudly and clearly and letting people know that mental health supports are there. There are mental health supports that are available through if you have employment and you have benefits, you need to find out what benefits are available. If your company allows for a certain amount of dollars for therapy supports, then access that. If there is an employment assistance program, then access that. If not, there are multiple community programs out there that will offer therapy at low cost or no cost. There might be a bit of a wait because everyone's accessing therapy these days, but it's best to get your name on the wait list than not have your name on the wait list. And these things need to be publicized. They actually need to be talking about it in the media. We need to be posting about it on social media. We need to be sharing links and resources depending on the area that you live in. Ontario, in Canada, in North America, across the world, I'm sure there are, wherever you live, there's a community agency that's offering some supports. If you call a therapist's office, find out if there is a low cost option for you, find out if there's a sliding scale. We need to start talking about these things more often because individuals don't know what's available to them. And also, we need to normalize this. We need to normalize accessing supports. And also, let's talk about it in our families, in our close-knit communities. If you need support, if your daughter needs support and you can't afford it, where are the godparents, right? Where's the auntie? Where's the grandparent who, if people are pouring into your child's saving plan for university, find out if they can contribute to their mental health as well. And let's get our people some support.
No,
Crystal,
go ahead.
Dr. Crystal, anything to add there?
So I'm going to start with mental health is health. That's what I'm going to say first and foremost. I think we
Yes.
forget that mental health is health. If, my brother Dwayne or, my sister Cheryl, if you come to me and say, my blood pressure is through the roof, I don't question what you're saying to me. I don't question it because you know what? That is something that is not only based on your subjectivity, but I'm able to objectify it. And I think that's the struggle with mental health. It's completely based on the subjective narrative of the person that's speaking to their experiences. And just back to Dr. Roxanne's point, it is having those conversations, cultivating the safe spaces. Like I think about growing up, those safe spaces once upon a time was the hair salon or the barbershop, where, the stylist would be the ad hoc therapist, helping somebody to walk through their narrative. And that was our safe space. And, sadly, again, because of just, the narrative of where we are in this 21st century, that collective doesn't really exist anymore, where, Friday evening, you look forward going to the hairdresser with mommy, or you go to the barbershop with daddy, and you're there literally all evening, like just write it off because it's a conversation that's happening surrounding, mental health. But we also, I think that's the first part. Like, I think in our Black community, we have to talk about mental health as health. And that is the first piece of that dialogue. Back to, Dr. Roxanne's point, there are tons of services that do exist that are free or at minimal cost. And, it is up to us, especially for us in this platform, that know where these services are. How are we making sure that those in the community are accessing it? So for myself, I make sure I take accountability for that. I make sure that I give that information to those that need it, or I make sure to post it where it needs to be posted. When I have the opportunity to have it on larger platforms. So for example, being on the Provincial Women Committee, I'm actually planning a mental health day for our frontline workers, and, and making sure that, that other professionals are in the room, that we can talk about this in that safe space. It is about, I'm finishing up, I know Brother Dwayne knows about this, is I'm finishing up the documentary talking about Black mental health, and hoping to have that premiere happening soon as a plug, because I am very passionate about mental health. And so I'm very fortunate that I have, other professionals on there like Dr. Kwatu, who, works for the city, and he's doing a lot of great work. I have Dr. Williamson from CAMH, who does a lot of work and just recently published her textbook. So big up our Black brothers and sisters who published a textbook in nursing with regards to mental health. So I'm surrounded by people that have the knowledge, skill, and judgment, but it's for us to put our boots on and go into our communities and inform our community members, and just driving that message home that, okay, you may be scared to talk about it to a professional, because again, we just alluded to that our healthcare system is not safe. I'll be the first to tell you that as a Black person, it's not a safe space for us, right? Because the moment that you go in and you say that you feel depressed, they want to form you. They want to pop pills and push it down your throat. And they're not trying to do the assessments that are needed. They just come in with their biases and their belief systems and treat you the way they feel they want to treat you. And that's not only for mental health, that's all healthcare issues. So where do we find those safe spaces that are not necessarily the hospital, that they can get the services and the supports needed? And then if needed, because don't get me wrong, again, mental health is health. If a psychiatrist is needed, let's assess that, and let's make sure that we cultivate a community around that person, that when we do bring them to the hospital, that they're getting the supports needed, they're getting the help needed in a safe manner. I think the final thing I'm going to say is that if you have to go down that route, have an advocate at your side, because it's hard for you to advocate for yourself when you are in the situation.
100%.
And don't go alone. Go with somebody you trust, and make sure that person has some knowledge of the system, that they can advocate for you, because that is going to make the world of a difference to how you're going to get access to the supports and receive the supports or the treatment needed.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for, just a wealth of knowledge and information and perspective and insight. We're going to jump to our last question, which is basically your final thoughts on, in a safe space, what is your final message to the Black community about mental health? Let's start with you, Jermaine.
Okay, Black men. Let me start with Black men first of all. So, Black men, you're not looked upon as weak when you need help.
That's good.
Accessing mental health supports is going to be key. Talking to somebody, actually, just accepting the fact that you're vulnerable is going to be key for you getting help. I can tell you this from my own experience, not just as a therapist, but a person that had to decide, you know what, I need help. There's just some things going on with my mind personally that weren't lining up. And being able to find, those safe spaces, even the people in your corner. Let me just, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but you really need to assess the people in your corner. You need to ensure that the people who really support you are going to be down with you when you yourself are down. So you need to make sure that if there are people that are going to be behind you when you're at your lowest point, those are the people you stick with. Everyone else, you're going to have to just hold off, and not be a part of it too much. Because in order for us as Black men to move forward, and especially for our community to move forward, it really starts with us accepting the help, receiving the help, and going through the process. Because there's going to be a change. There's going to be a strong change in our community when we begin to take responsibility for the things that we need to do for our mental health. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, all right now.
Well,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Roxanne, come to you.
I would like to tell people that you are not imagining it. The sadness, the loneliness, the pervasive worry that never goes away. You're not imagining it. Even if your doctor says, "Oh, you'll be fine," you are not imagining it. It's okay to get a second opinion. And the other piece, Jermaine was just speaking directly into the lives of Black men, and I would like to do the same. And I'd like to say, even if you have gotten to a certain point in your life, not addressing the trauma that you've gone through, the gun violence that you've witnessed, the friend whom you've seen pass away, the trauma that you experienced in childhood, the neglect, like those pieces that you have gone through, there's not enough bear in the world that can get rid of that. There's not enough women in the world that can get rid of that. All of the coping strategies that you've been using to kind of push it at bay when you have quiet moment, it all comes rushing back to the surface. Get yourself some help.
Hmm.
Find someone to talk to. Get yourself some help. It's going to impact your relationships. It's going to impact your parenting relationship. It's going to impact your social life. It's going to impact your job. Get some support and get the help that you need.
Mm.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
You know, before we go to Crystal for her last point, I gotta tell you, Dr. Francis, that what you just said really spoke to me personally because, you know, as I shared in previous episodes, last year, you know, I had a major mental illness challenge that I'm still working through. And one of the things was realizing that a lot of it was unidentified. And I had been finding ways to cope, not realizing that I'm trying to manage something that I was unaware of. So
Mm-hmm.
it is so valid to me. And it's something that I think a lot of men need to hear is that, you know, there are things that you're doing and you don't realize why you're doing it, but really it's something that you're doing to cope with what you don't understand that's going on between your ears. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Dr.
Sure.
Crystal, your final thoughts, please.
So a lot of what Dr. Roxanne said and Jermaine said, I echo wholeheartedly. And I'm going to, also I'm going to say it a million times over because I believe in this wholeheartedly that mental health is health. And if and it's okay not to be okay. And if you're not okay, seek help. Seek help if you're not okay. It starts with a simple conversation. Mommy used to say, if you want to know who's really in your corner, get sick or get in trouble, and you'll know who's genuinely
Mm.
Mm.
in your corner. So, make sure that the circle of people that you do have in your corner are sincere and genuine, that there'll be no judgment and no bias. Again, we didn't really talk much about the culture of our Black community surrounding mental health and why we are the way we are when we do address it. But it's understanding the role that culture plays, understanding the role that you play in your own narrative with regards to getting those supports, and how do you personally debunk that stigma. And so I just want to echo all those sentiments, and not to jump too much on the bandwagon, but get the supports needed. And sometimes it's just a conversation. Sometimes people think inherently that I have to find a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and not necessarily so. Sometimes you just need to talk it out, and sometimes through your own self-talk or talk with that safe person in that safe space, you're able to self-resolve and get that healing that you need to move forward. And the final thing I'm going to say is surround yourself with people that are going to pour into you, that are going to lift you up and edify you. That when they do see that you're down, and they see that you're not in a good space, that they'll be unapologetic to reach out to you and say, let me love on you, let me embrace you, let me support you, because I know that what you're going through right now may not be an easy task at hand. I see that you're triggered. How can I support you being triggered in the moments of you being triggered? Because George Floyd was a perfect example. Many of us were triggered. Who was your safe space during that season, that when you were being triggered, that you were getting that support from them? So I really want to emphasize that, because one thing about mental health is that when you catch it early, it's easy to fix and resolve. It's when we don't treat it. It's when we don't get the support. It's when we don't, talk about the elephant in the room. That's when things explode, and things, can have catastrophic outcomes for those that are
Mm.
receiving, that are looking to get that support. So that's what I will say about that.
So true.
Thank you
Wow.
so
Amen and
much.
amen.
Yes.
Well, it has been nothing but an honor having you with us, Roxanne, Jermaine, Dr. Crystal. My goodness, this conversation, I know I will listen back to this particular episode many times over, and pause, because you guys drop and then you keep going, and then you drop another bomb and you keep going. And I just want to take it all in. I think I want to just simply say, as my contribution, to Black men everywhere that are listening to this, that have been shared this podcast, it's been sent, you don't know even how you got here. We need you.
Mm.
We need you. We
Mm-hmm.
honor you. We value you.
Mm.
We celebrate you for your sacrifice, your struggle, for your desperation to be visible, to be seen and heard, to be treated better than. We see it and we are with you. You are not alone in this. And I just to echo the experts that are here, to look for solutions to cope is simply putting a band-aid over a bullet wound. It's
Mhm.
time to pause. It's time to dig, to look internally, as my Dr. Crystal said. It may look like therapy, which is what we are hoping and rooting for, but it can also just look like pausing and checking in with yourself. Would you do that? Would you honor yourself and love yourself enough to do that? That's my final close.
Wow. Thank you for that, Cheryl. As a Black man, I received that. I'm sure, Jermaine, you received that as well, and any Black
Mm-hmm.
man listening to that. I'll just say quickly that let us put off these stigmas around our mental health. We are human,
Mm,
all of us, regardless of the color of our skin, our race, where we come from. We're human, and not because we're men doesn't mean that we don't have feelings, emotions, that we don't hurt the same way as our female counterparts or other races do. We hurt, we feel pain, we feel anxiety, depression. All of these things are human feelings. They are not, akin to some, but not others, and certainly not us. I've experienced it. I am going through it. I'm dealing with it. And I challenge you, I encourage you as a Black man to a Black man, whoever is hearing my voice or seeing my face, please, please don't be like me and wake up at 43 and realize that you have a
mm,
lifetime of
mm,
unresolved, undiagnosed, unaddressed traumas and things that you've just been coping with, that you've just been muscling through
mm,
because that's what the culture and our community said we had to do. No, it is okay to let that go, because I
mm,
truly believe that our better self, our best self, is on the other side of our healing journey. So please, one Black
mm,
brother to another Black brother, get the help you need, fix it, heal it, so that we can be the best versions of ourselves for
mm,
ourselves and for our families and those that love us.
mm. And Dr. Crystal, Jermaine, Roxanne, thank you so much for being with us and being in this safe space. We are so, so thankful for the wisdom that you shared. And to Black men everywhere, you have earned the right to heal. See you again.